100 years ago, French industrialist André Citroen founded Citroen. After visiting Henry Ford, André decided to produce the Type A on Europe's first mass-produced car assembly line, just 4 months after the end of World War I. His vision for the Type A was to be a light car built to good quality with an affordable price. In its first year, the Type A was priced at 7,950 francs, or a staggering 492,000 Australian dollars in today's money. It proved popular with over 24,000 Type A's produced in its 3-year lifespan, and it set in stone the future of the French brand. Now we are here in 2019 celebrating its centenary, and there's been plenty of ways Citroen has marked the milestone, as head of brand Arnaud Belloni discusses.
I really wanted to show to the people the future, and we have made 2 concept cars. One is called Ami One Concept, and it's showing the vision of Citroën in terms of electric mobility. And a second concept car has been made in order to show our vision about autonomous, long-haul electric drive, also driven with artificial intelligence. So that concept car called 1919 Concept has been also made this year. We created 3 years ago a website called citroenorigins.com, where you can physically find, I would say, the top 80 cars of Citroën that are organized in different categories. You can see the interior of the car. You have the exterior of the car. We recorded noise and we scan advertising booklets. So in fact, you can find a lot of things. Mm-hmm. Of course, we have made big events. We have made an official enormous event in France. During summer, it was La Ferté-Vidame in Normandy. We had 60,000 people in 3 days. In Paris on June 4, it was called Citroën Born Paris 15. We had 40,000 Parisians during a weekend. We have been visiting fans all over the world, and we have recorded stories about them. Honestly, tremendous. This is really at that moment that you realize that the brand is iconic.
Linda Jackson has been the Citroen CEO since 2014. We sat down with her to learn a little more about her time within the automotive industry over many decades.
Well, to be honest with you, I got into this industry purely by accident, but I've never left it, and I've been in it now for over 40 years. So I got in it by accident because I was going to go to university to train as a teacher. In the holidays, I decided that I wanted to earn some money, so my uncle found me a holiday job for 2 months, which was at Jaguar. I mean, I didn't do a great deal of work in the 2 months, to be honest with you, but he showed me around, the design. I went down the sort of factory to understand how it was built. I saw so many facets of what the automotive industry was, and I was just fascinated. So I made this very sort of mind-blowing decision to actually, okay, I'm going to stop here, not go to university. And I obviously trained and went to university later, but I just find automotive cars is something that everybody buys, I believe. 99% of people buy because emotionally. They buy it because they love the brand, they love the car, they want to say something about themselves. And I find it quite exciting that you've got that element of it. So I call it a sexy project to be able to deal with. And the other is because there's so many times you touch the customer, whether it be in the dealership or, obviously across the whole customer journey. So I think it's those things. So a bit of an accident, never left it, love it. And, I do think the car is something that just fascinates. It's an emotional product.
What's your earliest memory of cars?
Oh, my earliest memory of cars was on a Sunday. We always used to go with my grandparents. We had a car, but my grandfather had this old Morris Minor type car. And we always used to go out into the country and have picnics even if it was raining, and it does a lot in England. We used to have a picnic, and that's the first memory. And I must have been probably 3 or something when I can remember that. And sort of it's sticking in my mind because he was so proud of this, and it only ever came out on a Sunday. He never used it any other day but apart from a Sunday.
Must have been in impeccable condition.
Oh, it was in unbelievable condition, and not many miles on it because he didn't go very far. So that was my first memory, and then the second one is always your first car. And my mum and dad bought me a car when I passed my driving test when I was 17, and that was a Mini. Everybody had a Mini in those days, and I just loved it. I went down the south of France in this Mini with my friend, and we had some great times when you're 18.
How much have you seen the industry become more accepting of females since you started in 1977, and perhaps more so since you've been CEO?
Yeah, I mean, the whole industry has changed. There's still not enough women in the industry. But, I can remember maybe in the 90s even, when I was quite a senior manager and going, where you have these seminars where it's the top 300 people in whatever, and it was the top 300 people in Land Rover and Jaguar and Rover, and there were 3 women. 2 were from human resources, and then there was me. And it's changed now. I in my organisation in the centre of Paris, 35% of my people are women. So it's changing. And the whole industry is changing. I think there's a perception it's still very macho, and that you have to be an engineer and you have to love cars. I mean, I love cars, but I have no idea what to do with the engine apart from to drive the car. But I think it needs to change because, when I look at who buys my cars, 50% of my cars are bought by women. And I think I saw a survey that was done somewhere, I think it was in the UK, where, behind the decision to buy a car was 90% of them was the woman, because they chose the colour, they chose the trim, they chose this, they chose that. So I think it's really important to encourage women to come into this industry, and particularly now, because it's really now becoming not an engineering thing. I mean, clearly it's very important to have properly engineered cars, but it's more also about the customer journey. So how do the customer touch points? So what should the dealerships look like? How should we make sure that people, the salesmen, talk in the right language? All of those things. And, women, generalization, but women tend to be very good at that interrelationship skills. So it's changed, it's changing, it's evolving, it's far better than it used to be. But we could still go a lot further, I think.
Because you're the second automotive CEO in history, aren't you? A female automotive, I should say.
There's 3 of us now.
Oh, is there?
3. I think there may be a 4th one, because I understand that very, very recently there's something happening in Renault, so maybe there's another one.
Yeah.
But there's 3 of us. I'm the first female for Citroen. I'm the first English person to be for Citroen as well, but I mean that's another story. But yeah, I mean I think you need in any industry, and it's not just the automotive industry, the more women you can get in the top spots gives women thought, well, actually I can do that. And we talk about the glass ceiling. Is there a glass ceiling? Well, there isn't, because we're proof. But there aren't that many of us showing that proof. So yeah. I think the more and more we have at the higher stages of management will encourage more people to come into the industry.
What were the thoughts running through your head when you left the British car industry and the place where it all started for you, and moved to a French car company? How did that feel?
Well, that was a bit like a culture shock, to be honest with you. And I was headhunted to come to Citroen, and it was a wise move in the end, because of course the company I was working for actually went bankrupt afterwards. So I was very fortunate in terms of timing. Wow. But it was a culture shock, because actually back then, I joined Citroen in 2005, and back then Citroen, and indeed the group, PSA Group, which we're part of, was a very, very French company. So obviously you had to brush up on the French, because no English was spoken at all. It was very hierarchical, very few women in the top jobs, and it was a real culture shock. And I remember silly things. There's a silly example which you learn that when you go to work in another country or work for a different culture, that you have to accept. But of course, I remember sort of going working in France and saying, okay, first day, have a meeting, it'll be at 10 o'clock and this is the agenda. Well, of course, people didn't turn up at 10 o'clock, because in France they used to, and it's not so much now, used to all arrive 5 minutes later, because 10 meant 10:05, and the agenda meant nothing, because we started with agenda item number 1, but then somebody across the room went on to agenda item number 6, and it lasted 3 hours, and it should have lasted 2 hours. Complete bad management on my behalf of the meeting, but that's the culture shock. And of course then you have to try and make the compromise, and no culture is wrong, they're just different. So it was a real culture shock. And actually what's interesting now with the PSA Group and Citroen is that because we've become more international, because obviously now we're present in many international countries. We also, of course, bought Opel Vauxhall to part of the group. Is that we've been forced to become more international, and obviously English is the language that we speak within the organisation, and that makes an enormous difference as well. And more and more people are international, on, in the company. For example, on the executive board, the managing board, which I'm on, there's 16 of us, and two Portuguese, okay, so they're not French, an English person, me, somebody from Taiwan. So I mean, it's somebody from Middle East Africa. So it creates a diversity that really makes a difference. And of course, that means that it's changed dramatically in the 16 years since I first joined.
What are you most proud of in your entire automotive career?
This job. Doing what I've done with Citroen, to be honest with you. Yeah. And it's probably been the most difficult. It's been the biggest challenge.
Why is that?
When I took over Citroen in 2014, Citroen, it's got a great history. It's got fantastic history, beautiful legacy, fantastic models, everything. But I think it had sort of lost its mojo, if I can call it that. It had lost its enthusiasm and passion, and still many people that are passionate about Citroen. I'm not saying that, but I think what I wanted to do from 2014 was I needed to rebuild it, and that meant rebuilding a product plan, so a completely new product, fresh, with SUVs in it, because we didn't have before, to build a whole new marketing approach, to be more modern, more fresh, and all of those things. And that's what we've done since 2014, is build that whole strategy. And it's a strategy that we've introduced gradually through each region. So obviously in Europe, we've done it in Europe, and of course it's been very successful, and we're very, very successful in Europe. And now we're in the process of rebuilding it in China, and of course here in Australia as well. So I think that's my most rewarding, is that we've created a strategy that is working, and now we need to rebuild it. And isn't it a fantastic thing to be able to say and to have achieved, is that you've managed to help Citroen get back to where it should be, which is, it's a beautiful brand. It's got a great history, and it deserves to be loved. And you go outside here at this show, you see the people there, they've got their cars and their vintage cars, and they just love, they're passionate about Citroen. And that's what we want to create for our future as well, our present and cars, to make everybody passionate about Citroen.
If you could sum up Citroen in one word, what would it be?
I would want Citroen to be modern and daring. And I say modern and daring, I don't mean daring that's very risky, but I mean modern and actually challenge things. You think about Citroen in the past, some of the iconic models that we've launched, nobody would ever have thought of doing those. But we stand out. And when we were our least successful, when we weren't very successful, was when we tried to be like everybody else. So I think bold and daring is a really good way to go. One
of the things that stick out for me are air bumps, and nobody else has done that.
Nobody else has done those, you see. So exactly. And when I first introduced those on the C4 Cactus, people sort of looked at me and said, well, what on earth are you doing? And that's sort of, but it really stands out.
It does.
And we look for any sort of innovation that we can add that is useful to the customer, because those air bumps weren't purely just because Linda thought they looked good or anything like that. We spent hours testing shopping trolleys against it. Literally, we were throwing shopping trolleys against the side of the car to see how they tested. And of course, it was all about protection. But then it turned into something that was a sign and a sort of element of Citroen.
Yeah.
But that's fun. But that's bold. That's daring.
Apart from air bumps, what is your most favourite Citroen innovation over the years?
I think it's that hydraulic suspension, because of course it created that, I call it the magic carpet, the floating carpet effect of Citroen. And being able now to have, obviously the previous technology was great. We had it on many of the older cars, but it was actually very heavy. And it was actually quite expensive. And so with the new technology that you get, for example, on the new C5 Aircross SUV, that's a new technology, very light, very economical, which means I can put it on any car that I want. And that provides a fantastic driving experience, that Citroen driving experience, where you literally zoom over the bumps and they absorb the bumps. So for me, hydraulic suspension, there's been many innovations from Citroen, but I think hydraulic suspension really is the one, because it's the one thing, that comfort, that makes you different from everybody else.
Finally, Linda, for an aspiring young lady who dreams of working her way up to the top like you have, what words would you give her?
I would say have confidence in yourself and be prepared to sometimes come out of your comfort zone. I remember when I started my career, is that I remember one of the first major things was that somebody said, "Oh, you need to go and work in France. You need to go and work abroad." And I said, "Oh, no, I don't speak French that well. I mean, I do now. I'm fluent now, but..." And I said, "Okay, I'm not sure about it." And they said, no, you're going to go. And it was the best thing I did. So I think it's daring to have that confidence in yourself and being, as I say, come out of your comfort zone. Because I don't think there are many people these days that have their career planned out for, every single thing. And to be honest with you, my career, I started at the very, very bottom and worked my way all the way up the top. But I've done it by taking opportunities and sometimes taking a little bit of a risk, a bit daring, to be able to do something that I think will help me to develop my career. So I would say confidence in yourself and not in your comfort zone. And the third thing I would say, which I think has been very important for my career, which is have somebody, a mentor, who challenges you. And that's what I've had in the past. I had 2 great mentors. And they basically challenged me. So when I said, not sure about that, don't think I can do that, they said, yes, you can. You can.
Your mentors must be so proud of you now.
I think they are, yeah. I hope so.
Linda, thank you so much for your time.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
We were on site at the 2019 Motor Classica in Melbourne, Australia, where Citroen was celebrating its centenary. Also, the Citroen Car Club of Victoria was kind enough to let us drive their pride and joys. And we started with Eric Bishop at his 1953 Traction Avant.
Key there, turn to the right, and foot on the accelerator. There's no synchro in first, so when you put it in first, you have to be stopped. When you let the clutch out, basically it's like you got the foot on the clutch and the accelerator's like that. It's an instant thing out, so you just drop the clutch,
really,
accelerator down straight away, and it just rolls away. And the steering's quite heavy, but it's very direct. Once you get moving and driving, it's really easy to manage. It's the only idiosyncrasies it has. This was designed by Citroen in the 30s, the late 30s, and it was copied off the front end of a 34 Ford. Because Andre Citroen and Henry Ford were very good friends, but it was very innovative in the time because it has rack and pinion steering, invented by Citroen, torsion bar suspension, so each wheel is independent, radial ply tyres, which is designed by Michelin for this car, and it's a front wheel drive, and therefore there's no tunnel on the floor, so there's plenty of space. A bit faster, then into second, so it's up, across and second. That was reverse.
Oops.
Keep going.
Oh, yep.
So second gear is a good gear for this car for starting if the car is still moving. You don't really have to go back into first.
Okay.
But you can go faster. You can put it into third.
So third straight down?
Yep. That's all right. So bear in mind these cars were designed in 1933 and they're bordering on steam engine technology. Yeah, and so therefore gearboxes and that sort of thing are very mechanical and very direct. I found this car in a shed in the outback. We were out the back of Broken Hill four-wheel driving, and it had been sitting under a tarp for 20 years. The dogs used the back seat for its kennel. 100% complete, no rust. The guy said to me it was for sale. We looked at it, pulled the tarp off it, rev it up, put your foot flat on the boards. Yeah.
So good.
And so we put a bit of fuel in it and a battery in it, and half an hour later we fired it up. It hadn't been driven in 20 years.
Wow.
I bought it, took it home, and I spent 5 years restoring it. This car was 30 years ahead of its time. The American car industry didn't start using rack and pinion steering or monocoque shells till the 50s. Because this is a monocoque body, there's no chassis. The back wheels, there's no diff, it's just there's no axle or anything. There's just two independent wheels with a spreader bar between them to keep the geometry in the right angles. Yeah.
Do you have any idea how many are left in Australia? How many have survived?
I don't really know, but I'd say 30 maybe, 30 or 40. There's a lot of them still sitting in paddocks and old farm sheds and so forth, that if you got hold of them, you could pull them apart and probably build a car out of one or two or three cars.
Yes.
But on the road driving, I wouldn't think there'd be more than 30 of them left. And of course, when these things were made, because the front wheel drive, they used to outrun MGs and Jags in hill climb racing. The floor's flat, and you can adjust the torsion bars down to 75mm clearance off the ground. So being so flat, it adds to the suction of the car on the road handling. So these were very popular for racing, and on top of that, the gearboxes are actually cast aluminium, and that was from the 30s. They're great racing car gearboxes. These seats are all original, and this is the colour of a black car seating. And as you might have not noticed, but the wheels are painted the same colour as the seating. That was Citroen's style. Citroen also was the first car to have two-tone colours. He was a good friend of Henry Ford, and Henry Ford said to him, he's painting cars that are black and ivory or grey and burgundy and that type of thing. Henry Ford said to him, "Why are you doing this?" And he said, put it back to second. Yeah, drop her in, just accelerate away. Well, we market our car to women. And Ford said, "But men buy the cars." And he said, "Yes, but the women make a decision as to the style of car we want and so forth. So that's why we designed them the way we did." And Henry Ford thought, what a great marketing idea. But it took him a long time to paint cars different colours other than black after that, but it was after the Second World War. He poached a young Italian designer from, I think he poached him from Renault. Renault was his biggest opposition at the time, and that guy came up with this model, and of course the other ones that look like little spaceships, because previous to that all cars were rear-wheel drive with running boards, because they had a chassis. Without a chassis, you get the car down lower. It was easier for kids to get in and out, easier for women to get in and out. So he really marketed hard towards women, and it became the biggest selling car in Europe from mid-30s through to about 1956, 55, 56. The European ones had a metal dashboard that was enamelled, and they had two seats, but they were fabric covered, and the seats were actually really seats. They were square-shaped things like a kitchen chair, They weren't like a leather-bound, bucketed type seat. They were just a square-shaped thing that were bolted to the floor. Wow. Pull the handbrake and we're away.
Citroen was very clever in its very early days for promoting its name. At the start of the 20s, it sold toy car Citroens in the hope that a child's first word would be Citroen. And at the 1922 Paris Motor Show, an airplane sprawled Citroen in smoke 5 kilometres long in the sky. In 1923, the first road show in the world began, where a procession of cars travelled the country to promote the brand and dealerships. 2 years later, the name Citroen lit up the Eiffel Tower with 280,000 light bulbs. It was a billboard that stayed with the tower for another 9 years and certainly was a spectacular sight. In the same year, Citroen donated 165,000 road signs to spread throughout France with the words "Donated by Citroen," an ingenious way of getting the name out to the cities and more regional areas. Citroen organised 35 cars on a promotional tour from Paris to Beijing, covering 30,000 kilometres. A film crew also tagged along, and the movie was screened in cinemas. And in Paris 1933, Citroen broke an incredible record. In a demonstration of the brand's reliability, an 8CV was driven on a track for 134 days non-stop. With 7 drivers doing 5-hour stints, the long-distance record was set at 300,000 kilometres, reportedly driven without any defects to the car. This, of course, hit the news, and Citroen offered 300,000 francs to anyone who could beat it. Guess what? Nobody did. The best-selling Citroen of all time is the iconic yet polarising 2CV. From 1948 to 1990, the overall design of the car did not change, and it saw 5.1 million of them leave the factory and find new homes. Ted Cross took us through on how to drive his wife's 1987 2CV.
To select first, you've got to put your foot on the clutch, bring it down and pull it back, and that's first gear. When you're driving, you don't have to move it into second because it's sprung loaded. Yep. You just push it and it clicks up to itself, goes into second, and then you go back to third. So they're the only gears you need to use today.
Yep.
Okay, so first and second are on the same plane, but first is
Correct.
down.
So first gets the car rolling, and around town you just use second and third backwards and forwards. And
Yes,
it's really
right.
quite simple.
Yep.
My
But
God.
it does your head in. Yeah, if you try and
third,
push it into second, you'll go into fourth.
Right.
If you try and turn it yourself, because it's sprung loaded just to do itself.
Better you than me, I'll say that.
Now,
It's going to be fun.
these cars, because they're air-cooled, probably what you're going to have to do is put your foot on the accelerator and don't take it off, and I'll just turn the key and start it.
Okay. Do it now?
Okay,
Like
yep.
all the way or
Yeah,
just...
just and hold it.
Yes.
Okay. The handbrake's the only other tricky thing. You've got to
Yep.
just take the pressure off it, push that button in, and the handbrake will go in.
Got the top open today. What a day for it.
Need rev side.
What engine is this?
This is
What size?
an air-cooled 600cc engine.
Even though 600 is not much, but this would weigh a lot though. So
Only weighs, I think it's like 700 kilograms maybe, and it's about 32 kilowatts of power, so it actually goes okay. You get about 6.5 to 7 litres per 100 kilometres. So the other trick is that this doesn't return, so
Yep.
now we're going to go left. You're going to have to turn the indicator off yourself. Now
All right,
push it
now.
straight through. Push it straight through. Away we go. And then you just pull it back into third.
Is this an Australian delivered car?
No, there's none of these are from Australia. They've all come from Europe. They never imported them after the 50s. I think Dutton's might have imported about 4, roll it around, it doesn't mind it. That's it. It's not going to fall over for you.
this is a blast. Okay, I've got to get this third one right now. I'm going to try and get...
No, I'd stay
I'd stay second?
until you get past this guy.
Sure.
So usually, because it's a little engine, you get over a hill before you change.
Yeah.
So any time from now on, you change up.
Alright, now pull it out.
Just pull it straight through. No, don't push it down.
Oh.
Pull it up. Pull it up. Yeah.
Ah, that was better.
Yeah.
Yeah, it felt
Yeah,
good.
so it's
yeah.
down first, but then
Then just straight out.
so just pull the handbrake on. Keep pulling. Yeah, that's it. Locks itself.
And then
Pull it into neutral. We're done. Just turn it off and.
The ID19 is close to Citroen Australian enthusiasts, as this model was assembled on the outskirts of Melbourne from 1961 to 1967. Ferdinand Saliba has owned his 1962 ID for a very long time.
I've owned it for 43 years. I'm only the second owner of this vehicle. I brought the kids home from hospital in it. It was my daily drive to Footscray every day. Yeah, I've still got it. What I like about the car is when I bought it in 76, it had a lot of passive features, which cars of that day didn't have. Like, that's soft. There's nothing sharp on here. Plenty of space for the kids. The bassinets went on the back. The steering wheel, of course, that's also a passive safety feature. If you hit that, this folds back, so it doesn't.
So the steering wheel sort of folds forward.
Yeah, this collapses forward.
Yeah, right.
And this is curved. Like in the old Holdens, if you had a head-on stack, this would impale you.
Oh, how smooth is this going over the bumps?
That begs the next question. Is this hydro-pneumatic suspension in this one?
Yes, and you can change the suspension sitting down there on that lever.
The lever.
On the later model, they brought it on the side. And the best thing I like about this car is when there's speed humps, I go over them at about 30 k's an hour beautifully, and then people follow me at 30 k's and bottom out.
Can you tell us a bit of history about this certain model, how local it is?
This car was assembled in Heidelberg at Continental in General, and it was sold through Commonwealth Motors in Beckett Street in North Melbourne. It's an Art Deco building. It's still there. It was a Harley Davidson motorbike shop recently.
I think a lot of people would probably see one of these and recognise it as a DS
Yes.
rather than an ID.
That's right.
What are some of the key differences between the two?
Okay, this is for marketing. This is called the Parisienne. It hasn't got power steering, and it hasn't got some of the embellishments like a bit more stainless, etc., etc. The seats would have been leather. These are vinyl, good quality vinyl. These are still original, by the way, with the exception of.
Really?
Oh,
This is
wow.
all original. This is not,
Fantastic.
but the rest of the car is original.
It's utterly spotless.
It is. It really is.
Of course, the dashboard was different on a DS19. They had a more scalloped, stylistic dashboard. It was hydraulic gear change. This car has got inboard disc-mounted disc brakes, right? So there was no other car on the market in those days that was offering, unless you were super sports car or something.
What engine is it?
1911 cc overhead valve engine, single carby. Does about 10 litres per 100. It's got a very good aerodynamic figure. It's sort of like in the Porsche category. That little rattle you can hear, unfortunately, there's the windscreen wiper rod that operates the windscreen wipers. That's a bit rattly.
If a classic car doesn't have rattles, there's something wrong.
So how many miles or how many Ks has it done?
It's done about 380,000 kilometres. It's on the third time around in miles on the clock.
Is it really?
And with the being Aussie built, how much of it was actually Australian? Were they a knockdown kit from
Yes.
France?
That's correct.
So pretty much
Yeah.
put in a box and sent over for assembly.
Yeah. French horn, little
Fantastic.
French horn. It's like a reminder horn, that one. Beep, beep, beep. And then if you're really serious about it, yeah.
That's something I'd like to see a return of. That would actually be really helpful. And I have to ask, because it's an unfortunate part of the classic car ownership experience, but have there been any heartbreak moments while you've had it?
No, I've driven this car to Perth. I've driven this car as far north as like Mullaney and all up that part of Queensland.
Fantastic.
Everywhere. No, I'm a believer in preventative maintenance.
What's actually involved in the hydro-pneumatic system?
Well, in this car, it's a pretty basic hydraulic system. In the later cars, especially in the later Ds, the DS23 fuel injected, I mean, there's a lot of more complicated stuff. But if you change the oil and clean the filters, that eliminates a lot of problems, because the contamination is what gets you in the end. The height correctors don't work properly. The spool valve on the brakes clog up, all that sort of stuff. So it's all about the oil.
Do you do the work on it yourself?
Yes.
Yeah? What do they like to work on?
Pretty straightforward, because the rear guards come off with one bolt. And
Alright.
so you pull off the bolt, the guards
bolt?
come off. Yeah, I'll show you later. The front guards with 3 bolts, they come off. You can drive this car on 3 wheels. I don't know if you know that. You can take off the back wheel and you can actually drive it on 3 wheels.
Can we try that? That's really cool.
Yeah. That was one of their big advertising features.
So how does that work?
Because you've got a height corrector in the back.
Yeah.
You've got a height corrector, which is like a feedback system, right? So the hydraulics has got a feedback system. So it knows if there's no load on that end, it'll bring the arm up. And the whole thing is so nicely balanced that front wheel drive, away you go. And of
So
course,
it's actually smart enough to recognise that there is no load on that wheel.
that's
and
right.
lifts
Yeah,
it up.
yeah, because it's got torsion bar. There's a torsion bar linking the two. The sensor's in the middle, and the torsion bar is the feedback mechanism for the sensor. And there's a sensor in the front as well, and then that's how you get the height correction.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And to change the wheel, if you have a flat tyre, you jack up the lever to the high point. There's a little tripod, and you lock it in, you undo the nut, drop the suspension to the lowest point, and the wheels retract. So that's what Formula 1 cars do now. And then you take the wheel off, and it's a single nut, because it's a captive arrangement, and you haven't got 5 bolts or whatever it is. Citroen is sort of famous for transitioning stuff from one model to the next. The traction, the model before this one,
Yep.
they actually, and it's called the H6H model, they trialled the hydraulic suspension on that car from the data they gained from that, and that was the platform for building this car. Just take that off.
Citroen is famous for being innovative, and here are just some of what Citroen has contributed to the automotive world. The early 1920s, first brand to offer car leasing and renting, along with Europe's first 1-year warranty on new cars. 1922, Andre created Sovac, Europe's first car finance company. Also the first cars to cross the Sahara in the world's first mass-produced track vehicles, the B2 half-track. 1923. The B2 Caddy was the first European mass-produced car. 1924. The B10 was the first European car to be built using all steel for increased stability. 1926. Citroen broke a European record of producing 400 cars a day. 1927. It was the first employer in France to implement a 13th month salary. 1932. The floating power engine was invented for the C6G. By fitting rubber blocks between the engine and chassis, it reduced cabin vibrations. 1934. The Traction 7A brought the first front-wheel drive car, a monocoque body without chassis and hydraulic brakes. 1939. The Tub was the first mass-produced front-wheel drive van. It also had a sliding side door, low loading sill and an interior height that you could stand up in. 1948. The 2CV was the first front-wheel drive small sedan, and the 2CV van was the first mass-produced front-wheel drive minivan. 1955. At the Paris Motor Show, a record 12,000 people ordered the DS on the first day, and it ballooned to 80,000 by the end of the show. The DS was also the first car to have hydro-pneumatic suspension, disc brakes, a semi-automatic transmission, and variable assist power steering. 1967. The DS was the first to get curved or swiveled headlights that see around corners. 1969. 267 customers drove the M35 prototype to provide valuable feedback. 1970. The CX and BX had the first rotating drum speedometer viewed through a magnifying glass. The SM was the first European car with steering wheel height and depth adjustment and 4 power-assisted disc brakes with brake distribution. 1974. The CX was the first to feature single-blade windscreen wipers. 1996. The Berlingo was the first commercial van with an integrated load volume. 2004. The C4 was the first European car with lane departure warning. 2005. The CX was the first car to have a head-up display. 2014. C4 Cactus was the first to have passenger airbags in the roof, magic wash wiper system with the washer jets integrated in the wiper blades, a panoramic sunroof without a blind that has high levels of thermal protection, and its famous air bumps. 2018. The Citroen C3 was the first car in Australia to come with a factory-fitted dash cam. The CX was an executive car made from 1974 to 1991, and Max Harvey daily drives his 1979 model.
Is it crossing down for first?
Yep, I bought this car 2 years ago. It was not in the best state, but it was driving. I drove it down from Sydney, and now it's my everyday driver.
What's it like as a daily driver?
Perfectly fine. It's quite practical. It keeps up with modern traffic. It's let me down once when the starter motor died.
What made you opt for a CS?
I've always had a soft spot for the underdog. You know, everyone loves the DS and the ID and the SM, and the CX just sort of sits there unloved. Also, it was much more affordable than the other Citroens.
Can you give us an idea on what this sort of car would cost?
I paid $3,500 for this car. I've spent quite a bit on bodywork and done all of the mechanics myself.
Fantastic.
So a good CX probably set you back maybe 10.
So second?
Yep.
Straight up?
Yep.
Look at that. Lovely.
They say about these cars, the first time you drive it, you'll never want to drive it again. And the second time, you'll never want to drive anything else.
So it's a weird sensation to have to change gears but not do anything with your left leg. It just sits there doing nothing. What separates this from something else of its era?
Oh, well, this is a lot more safe than a lot of cars of its era. And this is also luxury trim level. So it has air conditioning and it has power windows and things like that. But it's very safe. It's got all crumple zones at the front and all sorts of things. You know, I heard a story about someone in the Netherlands who had one of these. He rolled over 8 times and came out without a scratch.
It is the complete absence of other stuff that you would get. The steering is really communicative, but it's also really light. There's no, I guess, you know, we're talking older vehicles, so there's no crazy vibrations from the engine. The brakes are really feelsome, but really short travel, so it doesn't actually compare to, I guess, much else from its era, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's got 4-wheel disc brakes, fully powered from the central hydraulic system. So the difference between this and a normal brake system is where in a normal car you're pushing a master cylinder and squeezing the brake fluid out to the... In this car, the fluid's already pressurized and you're just opening a valve to send it out. So that's why it's such a short travel. And the steering is completely powered, so there's no mechanical connection between the wheel and the steering rack. So it's the same system as the SM, except this is a bit less sensitive. The SM is only 2 turns lock to lock.
And what about, were these hydro pneumatic as well?
Yep. So we've got the height adjustment down here.
Was the interior original or was this been?
Yep, all
It is,
original.
oh, the brown. So good.
Oh yeah, very 70s.
Like brown herringbone velour. That's
Yes.
so cool.
Yeah. It's not a terribly powerful car, but if you push it, it'll go reasonably quickly.
What sort of horsepower were they?
116 horsepower.
Okay, that's not too bad.
What size engine?
It's a 2347cc. This engine had been around in various incarnations since the Traction Avant. So
Yes,
it's
right,
a
so it's
pretty,
that same
it's a
basic.
pretty old design.
Yep.
So it's not as smooth as most engines from the 70s. It's still running on a carburetor and points and things, so it's not perfect. 0 to 60 miles per hour in about 13 seconds. I can't hoon this around too badly, which is probably a good thing. Because going around bends at 30 kilometers an hour, you're scraping the door handles on the road. It's leaning a lot. I read a review from the time and they described it as having leech-like road holding, which I thought was appropriate because it sort of flops around a bit, but it will grip onto the road very well. Indicators don't cancel themselves. That's another Citroen thing. They all did that.
Really?
Yeah.
So they were supposed to be self-cancelling? No.
Well, that was a thing that some designer at Citroen said, the indicators should always be a conscious decision of the driver.
Okay.
French people can do what they want.
Yeah, true. That is very true. I keep braking for speed humps where it's probably unnecessary.
I go sailing over speed humps. And the single spoke steering wheel, don't get any obstruction of the instruments whatsoever. It's fantastic.
No, you've got like a 270 degree range
Yeah.
of being able to see.
And there is a really fantastic support network for these cars. Parts can be hard to get or whatever, but I just phone call people and they go, oh yeah, speak to this guy, speak to this guy. That's how it is.
So you're planning to hang on to this, or you've got another car in mind?
Definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, if ever I can afford it, it'll be an SM, but the CX does be fine for now.
This, I have to say, this is just surreal in terms of what it's like to drive. It's like nothing else.
But there are people who don't get it. Like my grandfather has always been a Ford and Holden man. And he's an old Italian guy. He's a bit stuck in his ways. So whenever I mention something about this car, he goes, "Oh, that's a shit design. It's stupid. What's it? The French? It's stupid. The French they're not nothing." And I'm like, all right,
They know a lot.
sure. They went to school, no, don't worry. I mean, I'll be driving you to the doctors, so.
What a blast.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Undoubtedly, one of the most sought-after Citroens is the SM. Known for its comfort, performance and styling, Lee Schultz is lucky enough to say he owns a 1973 model.
Start the procession back to the event now.
It's a Maserati V6. It's got some nice Euro stainless steel headers. Well, actually, it sounds like a European car in that regard. In the States, they, of course, had all the anti-pollution stuff.
Yes.
So you had to have air pumps. And
Why were you attracted to this car in the first place?
I've always been a Citroen fan. I also own a DS23 Palace, but this is the car that I suppose was the car that, okay, if we're going to have a Citroen right at the top of the range, well, it's got to be an SM. So, and it hasn't disappointed
Good.
thus far.
What do you like so much about it?
The styling and the technology, being technical, I appreciate the technology in the Citroen, but also I think this was the design was lovely, but I happen to like this particular design.
What are some of the tech highlights of the SM?
The wipers, you could call it load sensing. If there's not much rain, then of course they just move slowly, and if it rains heavily. But the aerodynamics in this, that sometimes you don't even need the windscreen wipers because of the... But that's only, of course, if you're traveling at a reasonable speed.
Yes.
If you look at the steering...
Completely self-centering.
Exactly.
Wow.
Do you know the stats on this engine?
180 horsepower, so it's not a lot, but it's a very sleek design. The gearbox, the match with the gearbox works really well. I must say, I also find it a very pleasant gearbox. It tends to fall very easily into the gate.
The other features, it's got that fully glazed front end, so number plates behind. Is it glass or perspex up front?
The number plates are behind the glass. The European cars had the 6 headlights, of which 2 were moving, but that's not allowed in the States. In the States, you only had the 4 headlights and they were fixed. And you weren't allowed to have a cover over them either. These days you can see there is a cover over it, which makes it look a little bit more elegant. So there are a few things with the US which were of course US requirements. Not that elegant. How the number plates are lit, they had to be lit from the side. In Europe they lit them down. It had to have reflectors or lights on the side, which in Europe, of course, they weren't in the original design. So there are quite a few things that had to be modified to meet the US requirement.
Yeah, that's nice.
That engine's phenomenal.
Oh, yeah.
And the brakes work too.
Oh, wow. Discs?
Yeah, inboard discs.
Yeah, right.
A couple of big inboard discs. 80% of the braking takes place in the front, so they need to be big. Discs at the back also.
Do you know how many are here in Australia?
They say 40 to 50. It's the old story, you know, there might be 7 here in Melbourne, but maybe 2 are not on the road, you know.
Yeah.
Because I know 3 cars that are not on the road and need and to fix them and to get them on the road is going to cost a fortune. Because that's the problem with these cars. If you buy one that isn't sorted, you're down a rabbit hole.
So is this all original condition? Have you done some work to it since?
This is it. The Beverly Hills doctor owned this from 74 through to 2000. And Jerry Hathaway has maintained this car, and I actually ended up acquiring it off Jerry because it was in his collection. This Maserati engine was designed by Alfieri because Citroen were the owners of Maserati at the time. And they gave him the brief to make a V6 2.7 litre because due to tax rules in France.
Yep.
And he did, and this was his. Later on it was also used in the Merak. So the originals were 2.7 litre, but yeah, as you start to market the vehicle in the States and they want air conditioning and some want an automatic, which I can't imagine wanting an automatic, but anyway, that's how it is. Then of course they brought it out to a 3 litre.
Yes.
So this is the 3 litre. The automatic is just a Borg-Warner 35, which is a gearbox that's been used by many other manufacturers, as they do. That strip on the side, every car that was sold in the United States, they put that bump strip on, you know, that runs along this car. It was just their marketing strategy. And then, you know, they said, well, that's how it is, that's how you're going to get it. And so guys that do a bare metal respray here, also in Australia, here and also in the States now, they'll take that off, weld up all the holes and weld up the reflectors on the side so that you basically get the look that the designers, the French designers originally intended.
Turn it back to the European specification.
Yes. This car was 15% at a higher price point than an E-Type Jag in the States. It was dollar for dollar the same price as a Dino Ferrari. So go figure.
Wow.
2 guys from the Rolling Stones, Charlie Watt and Bill Wyman, both bought one of these when they were living in France in 74. Keith Richard went and bought himself a Dino Ferrari. So who's the smart guy?
Citroen has always been a bold and creative brand, and no doubt will be for another 100 years. It continues to inspire classic Citroen car enthusiasts around the world and invites future enthusiasts with its unique designs and flair. Who would have thought 100 years ago, when André Citroen decided to build a 13-kilowatt car, that his company today would still be one of the best-selling car manufacturers in France and well-respected brands in the world? Citroen's Arnaud Belloni.
People buy us for reasons that are exactly not mainstream. They buy us because we are so different. They buy us because we are so comfortable. They buy us because we are so French.